Everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. So I am Allison Bennett. I'm the board's public information officer. With me today, I have John Wilbeck, the board's director, who will be helping me out with some questions and monitoring the chat box today. Just some reminders, everyone's going to be muted for the presentation. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat box. Can everyone hear me? Sorry, John says I'm muted. Okay, perfect. So everyone's going to be muted for the presentation. Please remember, if you do have questions, put them in the chat box and we will get to them as we go. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and it will be updated to our YouTube channel for anyone who may have missed it or has to leave early. Additionally, on the link you can see, or on the presentation, there is a link showing how to get the slides so you can follow along. Some of them are fillable, so you can type in notes if you would like. So feel free to go to our website and under resources, the NBEA Lunch and Learn webinar series option, and they will be available for you. I will be emailing attendance verification for those who participate in the entirety of the presentation. I'll typically send it out within a week or so. If you do not see it, please check your junk mail folder. And if you don't see it, let me know and I can send you an email if I note that you are on the list for participating in the entire presentation. If you do choose to use this presentation for continuing education credit, please use that email that I sent for attendance verification. It is anticipated the board will give credit for the webinar, but as a reminder, the board does not pre-approve any CE offerings. All right, so today we're going to go over the board and touch on that a little bit. So the Board of Engineers and Architects was created in 1937. Their purpose was to oversee the laws and rules governing the practice of engineering and architecture in Nebraska, to safeguard life, health, property, and promote public welfare. So the Nebraska Engineers and Architects Regulation Act, this contains the statutes and regulations that must be adhered to by the public and licensees. This includes the licensure process, as well as the licensee seal, enforcement, and when design professionals are going to be needed on a project. So there are 8 board members on the Board of Engineers and Architects. This has not been updated since we just recently elected new board chair, vice chair, and secretary. So we have 4 professional engineers, 3 architects, and 1 member of the public. So currently, our new chair is Bruce Dvorak. Our vice chair is Lenora Nelson, and our secretary is Daniel Thiel. So our board members are elected to serve 5 terms by the governor, and their duty is to help ensure the statutes and rules in our ENA handbook are upheld in Nebraska. So 2 primary missions of the board. First, we ensure that architects and professional engineers are qualified to practice. The board makes sure of this, make sure that they have their education, experience, and examination. Additionally, we enforce the act, particularly those provisions that require design professionals to be involved in a project. This could involve incompetence on behalf of a licensee or member of the public, designing a building structure that requires licensees to be involved in a project's design. So, when are architects or professional engineers required on a project? If the work comprises of the practice of architecture or engineering and the work is not exempt from the act, this means that design professionals are required. So we're going to touch on the practice of engineering and the practice of architecture, as well as exemptions in the act to help you determine if a design professional is going to be needed. So first, the practice of architecture. The practice of architecture is defined by statute as providing or offering to provide design services in connection with construction, enlargement, or alteration of a building or group of buildings and the space within and surrounding the buildings. So examples of this are architects are going to look at ADA codes, potential historical requirements, as well as aesthetics. Statute defines the practice of engineering as any service or creative work that requires engineering, education, training, and experience in the application of special knowledge of the mathematical, physical, and engineering sciences. So typically, engineering will focus more on the math, such as the calculated weight of materials, physics behind the structure, structural elements, snow loads, HVAC, and similar things of that nature. If you are unsure of if your project needs an architect or engineer on a project, the best thing to do is to go and ask a licensee. So are architects and engineers interchangeable? While much of what they do and produce may look similar at times, they both do plans, design drawings, technical submissions. There is a difference in the practice of architecture and engineering. Architects cannot practice engineering, and professional engineers cannot practice architecture unless they are licensed to do so. When looking at a project, an architect and an engineer may be involved when it may just be one or the other. So again, if the work comprises of the practice of architecture or engineering, plus again, if the work is not exempt, a design professional is required. So next we're going to touch on the portion that says the work is not exempt from the act. So we're going to look at exemptions and occupancy classifications. So years ago, our board decided what elements needed to be taken into consideration when determining if a new structure was going to be exempt from acquiring a licensee or not. So occupancy classification categorizes structures based on their primary usage. So a home's main purpose is residential, hospital's main purpose is healthcare, and so forth. This is going to be a vital first step in determining if you need that design professional on a project. Looking at that occupancy classification, seeing and determining what your project is under that. This information is going to be found in the state building code, which is often referenced by the board, code officials, and the state fire marshal's office. And also this information will typically be given to you by the state fire marshal or a local code official. But you also do have the resources through the state building code to review the definitions and what each occupancy classification is, which we will go over as well. So here is the occupancy classification table that the board developed through state law. It is also going to be board rule 10.3 in our handbook. So the occupancy classification will again categorizes these structures based upon their primary use. For example, we said home would be residential. We do have a school, let's say that'll be an assembly, or excuse me, school's main purpose is educational. Gym's main purpose will be an assembly. Again, this is going to be used to determine the maximum allowable building area that can be built without engaging a licensed architect or professional engineer. So what if a structure has more than one occupancy. Many structures will have this. It's not uncommon. When looking at a structure that has multiple occupancies, if it is containing multiple ones, it's going to be governed by the most restrictive occupancy for the purpose of utilizing that chart that we just shown, Board Rule 10.3. So here we have an example of a brew pub. It has multiple occupancies in it. So the factory is likely where the beer is made. Hazardous could be where hazardous materials are stored. Assembly is probably more of a tasting room, a dining area. Mercantile, say it's where the store you could buy goods. So when we look at this structure with the multiple occupancies, we're going to want to look at that occupancy classification table to determine what the most restrictive occupancy is for this structure. So we have, again, assembly, factory, hazardous material, and mercantile. So we have all those highlighted. And when we look at which one is the most restrictive, that's going to be assembly, as it's only 1,000 square feet. So we are going to categorize that entire structure as an assembly occupancy. So even though there's multiple ones in there that are larger, we go with the most restrictive one. So that's going to be an assembly. Any questions on multiple occupancies?
Doesn't appear to be any.
All right, so we're also going to look at some exemptions. So the first one is going to be farm buildings. State statute defines farm buildings, or excuse me, states the provision of the EN Act regulating the practice of engineering and architecture don't apply to the construction, remodeling, alteration, or renovation of farm buildings. So state statute states that the ENA Act for engineering and architecture don't apply to the construction, remodeling, alteration, renovation. Rule 10.2.5 defines a farm building as an agricultural building based upon the state building code. And so any buildings that look like barns or sheds but aren't used for that purpose, like if there are hosting receptions or a store or something similar, those are not going to be considered farm buildings. It's going to be an assembly occupancy. So Board Rule 10.2.5 describes farm buildings as a structure designed and constructed to house farm implements, hay, grain, poultry, livestock, or other horticultural products. The structure should not be a place of human habitation or a place of employment where agricultural products are processed, treated, or packaged, nor shall it be a place used by the public. So again, if it has human habitation, like we talked about with receptions or something similar, those are not going to be considered farm buildings. So again, it's what the purpose is of the structure to determine the occupancy. All right, so next exemption we're going to look at is trades. So state statute identifies other legally recognized trades as exempt from requiring licensees. So for example, a licensed mechanical, electrical, and plumbing tradesperson doing work within their scope who are competent to do that work would be exempt from the act, meaning you would not be required to retain a professional engineer to design that work. And this only applies to mechanical, electrical, and plumbing design. So Board Rule 10.6 states that if the responsible building official finds a hazard to life, health, safety, or welfare due to unusual circumstances of the building or structure, or there's an unusually large number of potential occupants in relation to the square footage for that particular occupancy, they may require plans and specifications and design to be prepared by a licensee. So these building officials can be more strict than the act, but not less strict. So we've gone over if the work comprises the practice of engineering or architecture and exempt projects. So if it does comprise the practice of architecture or engineering and the work is not exempt from the E&A Act, we're going to need design professionals on those projects. So what about renovations and additions? We're going to go over that if there is a need for a design professional on an existing building, structure, or work project. So renovations and one-level additions to an existing building, structure, or work are exempt from the E&A Act if the total impacted area is less than the occupancy classification and the area of renovation or addition does not adversely impact the mechanical system, electrical system, structural integrity, means of egress, and does not come into conflict with the occupancy classification of the existing or adjacent tenant space, building, structure, or work. So we went over that about what this can't inversely impact. Some of those for renovations and additions include if you're moving walls or doorways, if there's an HVAC update or change, structural updates, electrical changes, or if it does change the occupancy classification. So an example of a renovation building, so we have a 5,000 square foot business occupancy. The owner wants to renovate half of the building, adding 2 offices and 1 restroom. So the first question we want to ask is the renovation over the occupancy square footage maximum? So the exemption level for business occupancy is going to be 3,000 square feet. And so as the renovation space is over 2,500 square feet, it's not going to be over this occupancy classification. So it isn't changing, or excuse me, it isn't over that occupancy classification. And then second, we look at, are the mechanical, electrical, or structural systems adversely impacted, or are we changing egress? So what we know are the exterior doors and windows are going to stay the same. And the structural beam within the 2,500 square feet that supports the entirety of the 5,000 square foot building is going to be moved. So since we are wanting to move that beam, we're adversely impacting the structure of the whole building. As a result, licensees may now need to be involved. Exterior doors and windows not being changed, so that's egress going to be minimally impacted, but moving that structural beam is now impacting the structure of that building, and licensees may need to be involved. So next we're going to look at additions. So here we have a 2,500 square foot addition to a 5,000 square foot building classified as a business occupancy, and the additional space is going to be classified as a business occupancy as well. So is the renovation over the occupancy square footage maximum? Maximum square footage for a business occupancy is less than 3,000 square feet. So since this 2,500 square foot added space is going to be built with its own structural support in mind, it's going to have separate mechanical, electrical, and no changes to egress. And so with that information, design professional may not need to be involved. So let's say the two buildings share a structural wall, electrical, mechanical systems, and the exterior doors being changed. As a result of that, a design professional more than likely will need to be involved, as it's being the structural, electrical, mechanical, and change of egress are being adversely impacted. So next we're going to go over design professional seals. Do we have any questions regarding renovations or additions as we're going to be moving on from that? You can go ahead and type them in and John will review them and answer them for you.
Yeah, Allison, thanks. I think I'm on top of all the questions here, so I
Okay.
think we're caught up. Yes.
All right, perfect. Then we will go ahead and talk about design professional seals. So when looking at design professional seals, oops, you need to make sure that they must be legible with the signature date across the seal. So here's a sample of an architect and an engineer seal. These are going to be the most current and updated ones. If they do not look like this, you will need to make sure that you get it updated. We do have some resources on our website that can help out with that as well. So then here's what the architecture and PE seals look like in Nebraska when it comes to signing and dating. These seals need to be signed across the face of the seal, and they can be computer generated, they can be wet signed, they can be embossed. We don't care as long as it's signed across the face of the seal. If it isn't, then the seal is going to be invalid. And as well as a signature, you're going to want to include the date that this is being signed as well. So going over a few different types of seals. First, we have temporary permits. This is going to allow out-of-state design professionals to work on one project in Nebraska, and that project cannot exceed 2 years. If the project does go longer than 2 years, the licensee is going to need a Nebraska license. So they'll have to go through that process. So when sealing documents, the permit holder will need to use their out-of-state seal. So for example, John Doe's from Missouri. He's going to need to use his Missouri seal that was issued. And they must provide the permit information below the seal wherever the seal is going to appear on a document. So you're going to have your name, permit number, when that permit expires, and the project name and location. And all that information will be included on your permit information that you've provided to us. So next we're going to look at coordinating professional. A coordinating professional is going to be required for projects where there's more than one design professional involved. A licensed professional engineer, architect, or landscape architect could be designated as a coordinating professional. So one will be needed, let's say if you have two professional engineers, a professional engineer and an architect, two architects, and so on and so forth. So they will use their individual seal when they're identifying themselves as a coordinating professional. And then there will be some language that needs to be included by the seal, stating the licensee's name, and the coordinating professional and then the project's name. So this is going to signify the main point of contact for code officials or other professionals. It's not them taking full charge or full responsibility for the work. We just have it on there so that whoever needs to get a hold of someone regarding the project knows a main point of contact. And so this seal needs to go on the cover sheet of all technical documents, the seal and the language, as well as the signature and date. So professional engineer seals are a little unique here. Nebraska is one of the few states that license engineers in a specific discipline. However, they can practice in any area of engineering in which they have training, education, and expertise. You can get licensed in multiple disciplines, but like we said, you don't have to be licensed to practice in other areas of engineering. You just need to make sure you have that training, education, and expertise. Some of the common overlaps that we see are going to be civil structural, civil environmental, and architectural mechanical electrical. So when do plans need to be sealed? They need to be sealed, one, when presented to a client, public or government agency, including when submitting for a permit. This needs to be on all original copies, tracings, or reproducible drawings, as well as on the first and last page of specifications, reports, and studies. So on the example below, we have a page it's going to have the project name, location, Meldo, their address, and their seal, signed and dated across the face of it. So let's say there is a specification involving several licensees. The board recently added policy 2403 regarding this, which states when sealing large specifications involving the work of multiple licensees where it may be cumbersome to coordinate sealing the first and last page of each specification section, the licensee may affix their seal on separate sheets placed at both the front and back of the specifications, listing each section that the licensee prepared in accordance with the act. So this is going to allow the licensees to place their seal, put the page numbers they're responsible for on a separate sheet of paper, and making sure that that sheet is put on the front and back of the specification book. We know that there are some specs out there that are very large, and sealing all of that may be a lot of work, and so the board just wanted to make it a little easier by allowing them to put it on one page with your seal and the page numbers you're responsible for on the front and back of the spec book. So if you have some draft plans, Board Rule 617 states that if a document is clearly marked draft, prepared for preliminary submission and review, do not require the professional seal, signature, and date. This includes documents prepared for a client or government agency unless otherwise required by the entity. So we need to make sure that it is clear on the plan and in obvious language that this is a draft. So for example, we have our plan down there, big bright red capital letters saying draft. Pretty obvious. So when bidding out projects, you may get plans from construction companies that say they are a draft, and we need to make sure that they have it labeled and clearly marked as draft. Any questions over sealing, signing, dating plans? All right, I'm going to go on. We're going to look at enforcement. So when a complaint is received by the board in which it's alleged that a person or organization has violated our act, or if the board becomes aware of a compliance issue that may violate the act as well, they may refer the complaint to be investigated. So anyone can file a complaint with the board about projects built or renovated in Nebraska if there's a suspected violation of the act or board rules. The board has received complaints from numerous entities. We've got it from property owners, city, state officials, clients, licensees, and some complaints include if a design professional isn't involved on a project that isn't exempt from the act, if there are invalid seals on a plan or project, as well as professional misconduct on behalf of a licensee. So to uphold our mission and goals, we do work very closely with other state agencies and officials across the state who also share our mission to protect life, health, and property and promote public welfare. By working with these other agencies and officials across the state, we can ensure that we are getting out the correct information to the correct people so that the public is better informed and served. So some agencies we work with there, we got State Fire Marshal, DHHS, Department of Environment and Energy, as well as local building officials. So looking at complaints, the complaint form is going to be on our website, and these can be filed by completing this complaint form. The information is not going to be public, so this isn't going to be published anywhere for anyone to see. When completing this form, you're going to want to put as much detail as possible. Put in the alleged violation, who was involved, if you know the project, address. You can also include contracts and technical documents. Board staff will typically contact you within a week with more questions and gather any additional information. And they'll go over the allegation and review it to determine if there's probable cause that a violation has occurred. So the enforcement process, once we receive a complaint that the person or organization is alleged to have violated the act, the compliance officer will reach out to the complainant to gather more information. They may also reach out to the owner and contractor. Both of this is to gather more information about the project. Additionally, the compliance officer may visit the site. So once they gather all that information, and once all this process is gone through, they're going to present the information to the board. The board has a few options. They can either initiate a case in order the project be remediated by getting a design professional involved, or they can close the complaint. So if remediation is ordered, the remediation process involves the project owner engaging a design professional to look at the project and identify concerns to public safety, health, and welfare. So if this design professional has identified deficiencies, they must recommend design solutions to remedy the issue. So they will notify the project owner of that, and the project owner must remove the deficiencies identified by the remediation professional. So once the project has been remediated, the remediation professional will complete a final letter to the board stating so. And then so if the remediation professional finds that no deficiencies are found, they'll let the board know in that letter, and the complaint is typically closed. So we state that the project owner must remove the deficiencies identified by the remediation professional. So what if they fail to comply with this remediation process? So under Nebraska statute 813444, if a person or organization has committed a violation, one or more of the following actions may be taken against the person or organization. So some of those that the board have at their disposal: issuance of censure or reprimand, suspension of judgment, they can place them on probation, civil penalties not to exceed $10,000 for each offense, cease and desist order, and imposition of cost as in an ordinary civil action district court. Typically, the board usually does not take action, but if someone chooses not to comply with this process and have a design professional come out to remediate their project and review it, the board does have the ability to take action against the project owner. So what is the cost of noncompliance? By following the act, this can help individuals protect their property, protect people on their property, and prevent damage or liability from improperly constructed buildings. If the act is not followed, property owners and developers may be liable if the structure was built in violation of the act, as well as being subject to fines and civil penalties. So anything on compliance? Any questions anyone has in the chat?
They have questions in the chat. I'm trying to stay on top of them here.
Doing good? Okay. Thanks, John.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so next we're going to go over some proposed rules changes. We did just recently have our rules hearing last week. And here were the proposed rules changes. First is the proposed definition of public works, which was taken from Black's Law Dictionary, which reads structures such as roads or dams built by the government for public use and paid for by public funds. The next proposed rules change is regarding comedy licensure for model law engineers and model law structural engineers, which states that comedy applicants who meet or exceed the criteria of an MLE or MLSE as designated by NCEES, but who hold only a degree accredited by the Engineering Technology Accredited Commission, ETAC, of ABET, do not qualify for licensure in Nebraska. All right, so the next one goes over non-US jurisdictional comedy. So this is adding a licensure pathway for professional engineers licensed in any foreign country that is an authorized member of either the International Professional Engineers Agreement or the APEC Engineer Agreement as developed and published by the International Engineering Alliance. So if this is the case for someone, they may be licensed after they file an application with us, submit their NCEES record, and submit 3 references from a professional engineer indicating good reputation of ethical character. If they are not able to get those references, they're not available, the applicant will then be required to submit an explanation for board review. And then lastly, they will need to pass an examination on the ENA Act. So the next proposed rules change is states licensees who have knowledge or reason to believe that any person or organization has violated any rules or laws applying to the practice of architecture or engineering shall report it to the board within 90 days. They may report it to appropriate legal authorities, and they are required to cooperate with the board and those authorities as requested. So this is an update to Rule 5.33, which basically just states that if you have knowledge of a violation, potential violation, that you're required to report it. This just puts a time frame on it. So if someone becomes aware of a potential violation of the act, they have 90 days to report it. So the next one is one we already discussed regarding sealing large specifications. This is going to be new rule 6151. This one is regarding if there's a large specification which involves multiple licensees, they can place their seal and the page numbers of their specific sections on a sheet of paper and place it at the front and back of the specification. Another proposed rule change is stating that web-based offerings provided by the American Institute of Architects or AIA, may constitute all of the biennial education requirement. So this would be in addition to that list in Rule 931, which details which other 6 entities may constitute all of the biennial education requirements that are web-based offerings.
Yeah, and Allison, let me just add to that. I think the proposed rule says AIA approved providers, right? It's not just
Yes,
AIA. It's any AIA approved provider that's offering a web-based course is exempt
so that
from the,
web-based offering provided by them,
yeah,
yes,
they're not restricted.
correct. All right, and so the last proposed rules change details. The board will grant a maximum of 10 hours of continuing education in any calendar day. So that is going to put a limit on the number of CE hours the board can grant in a calendar day to 10 hours.
Right, and let me add something here too. We originally proposed this rule to be maximum of 10 hours in any 24-hour period. And it was brought to our attention that, well, we could run into some issues with, let's say, for example, a multi-day conference. And just because of where the 24-hour window started and stopped, we might run into some problems. So the board adjusted that language to now say any calendar day. So that's our measuring stick.
All right, so that is going to be the proposed rules changes. This was reviewed and approved by the board, and then we'll get sent to our Attorney General for review. And then if that's approved, then we'll get sent to the governor. And if these get proposed, or excuse me, if they get added, we'll get them added to the rule book and send out a notification about it. And we'll just make sure that everyone is made aware of these rules. But again, we have to wait for the Attorney General to review and then signature from the governor.
Let me address another question before, and I'll take this part about the Interior Design Registry. Kenneth asks, does the E&A Act state that the contractor causes the owner to be in violation of acting as architect if the architect was not involved through construction? Actually, it's pretty clear. It says that unless the owner engages licensees when required, that they're engaged in unlicensed practice. So the contractor is not identified anywhere in the statute, and I believe that's up in, let's see, it's in section 81, 3446, where it says that. So that section doesn't reference the contractor at all. Noah Miller asks, can CE credits be earned from equipment manufacturer webinars, or are they restricted? Well, I think both of those, at least the first part, is definitely true. You could potentially earn if it's related to the practice, but again, to know if they're restricted, you got to look at the type of provider that they are. If they're from one of the currently 6, soon to be 7, or hopefully 7 categories identified in Rule 931, then that's where your restricted providers are listed, or actually your unrestricted providers are listed in 931. So that's the answer to that question. Yeah, and Brandon just follows up. Got it. Okay. So Allison, if you don't mind, let me take questions on the Interior Design Registry, or go through this section quickly. So for all who are not aware, the Interior Design Voluntary Registration Act was enacted via LB 16 last year in 2024. It establishes an interior design registry, and somewhat surprisingly, that's overseen by the State Treasurer's Office. It's not done by our office or overseen by the board. It's a separate agency who does that. what this registry allows them to do, again, interior designers who are listed, who apply for a registry, allows them to do work as defined as the practice of registered interior design as described in that particular statute. And I just want to let you all know where that is. And you know, again, the board does not regulate the practice of interior designers, right? So I just want to make you all aware that at least in the board's opinion, um, I believe that some of that work that's listed in the scope is the practice of architecture. And so, again, this is kind of like it goes back to our exemption on licensed or folks practicing with a license or certification issued by the state. And the registered interior designers are allowed to do that. So I just want to make you all aware that the scope of work is listed in that statute section, 71-6103, sub 6, sub A. So if you're curious about what registered interior designers can do, it's listed in that statute right there. Next slide. That's it. Yeah, again, we can field very few questions about the registered interior design registry because that's done through the state treasurer's office, not ours. Okay.
Great, thanks, John.
Yep.
All right, so lastly, we're going to go over some resources and materials made available. So on our website, we do have a feature called the licensee lookup. This allows anyone to be able to search for a licensee, an architect or professional engineer. You can search by their name, license number, location. You can also look up organizations that are licensed through us. A lot of the time we'll recommend putting in your location, a zip code, starting off something small and expanding from that. I know I get calls from people out west in the state or central state wondering about licensees in their area, and that's the advice I give them, and they typically will have some luck looking and finding someone near them. So this is a really great option. This is what that page is going to look like. It'll give you some drop down options. You can also search anyone by their discipline as well. It'll give their status. So if you search for someone, it may come up as expired, or they have an active license. It may say if they're on probation, or so it will give you all of those individuals and their status. So another really helpful section is going to be our frequently asked questions. We have the do you need a design professional on a project, which will lay out that need and the occupancy classification and the square footage. For the general public, that will go over working with licensees, projects and buildings, exemptions, complaints, and information on remediation. We also do have a section for licensees that go over things that are going to be specific to them, such as the practice, their seal, if they need to update their contact information, temporary permits, titles. So there's just there's a variety of information available to all licensees just in one area to be able to search. And then for students, if there's a student going to school for architecture or engineering, that'll give experience, exam, and education information, all the things that we require for licensure, as well as information on MCARB for architects and NCEES for engineering students. The resources tab is going to have a lot of great information. The Nebraska Professional, which is our digital newsletter, which comes out towards the end of each month. This goes over any important information, any updates. It'll include any upcoming webinars and some important information, maybe regarding some compliance issues that we're seeing, That could just be helpful for anyone to know, just an FYI. It'll also include any resolved compliance cases, as well as those who just received their initial licensure. The Lunch and Learn webinar series, that will have the information regarding upcoming webinars, as well as past webinars. Those past webinars will include links to our YouTube channel, so you can view that presentation, as well as the PowerPoint slides. We'll have our publications on there. You can download PDF copies of our handbook, and several brochures are Before You Build, Remediation, Becoming an Architect, or Becoming an Engineer. So a lot of really great resources. Latest news. We will typically put on there if we have an upcoming rules changing hearing or upcoming webinars, any openings or anything like that. And links of interest, that's going to include information regarding typically NCWS and NCARB, or if you need to update your licensee seal, that will give links to areas that can assist you with that. Contact us. It's going to have all of board staff's information and what each of them does. So if you ever have any questions about who do I get in contact regarding my licensure or regarding a speaking event or compliance, it will have all of their information on there, as well as emails and phone numbers. Our basic email, we got our website right there, eanebraska.gov, our phone number, and our physical address. The contact tab will also have our generic NBEA.office@nebraska.gov, as well as our mailing address. So it's going to be a great place to be able to know who to contact, how to contact them, and provide that information for you. Lastly, be sure to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. We have Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We post a lot of great information on there, some trivia, some frequent questions that we get. And we'll also share some updates on NCWS or NCARB, as well as any upcoming webinars, board meeting agendas. We try and get as much information to you guys out there. So these are going to be great ways to access that information, as well as YouTube. Again, we post all of our webinars that we host on there. And so they're great to go back and review, or again, if you had to leave early, you can go back and pick up where you stopped. All right, so this is going to be it for the webinar. Is there any last questions in the chat? And then a reminder, it's anticipated the board will give CE credit for the webinar, but a reminder, we don't pre-approve these offerings, and you will get an email if you participated for the entirety of the presentation. I'll get that to you in the next week, but you will not be getting a certificate. So, and then again, if you want to submit this for CE credit, if you anticipate it, you'll want to submit that email attendance verification if you're selected for an audit. And to hang on to that. John, we got any final questions or anything we'd like to address?
I don't know. I think I've covered them all. I might be getting a couple phone calls or emails, and that's fine. But no, I think I stayed on top of them.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your help, and thank you for everyone for attending. Again, stay tuned on our social media, our website for any upcoming webinars. Typically, again, like we do them quarterly, so just keep an eye out for them. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to John or I, and we will be more than happy to address them for you. So you guys have a great rest of your day, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.